Chapter 21 Irene the Sly, Chapter 4 Irene didn't stop running until she was too tired to keep it up. Even then she kept moving forward, too afraid to look behind her. She spent no time thinking about what the 4 different staircases at the end of the tower base floor led to. She just went up one and hoped for the best.
You know, I can't believe that out of all those merchants outside the tower, only 3 of them had decent weapons,
Nethlin said casually. Most the group ignored him and continued walking as if he said nothing.
Hey, it's a pretty genius idea. Set up shop outside the tower and sell cheap merchandise to idiots at high pricings.
Theo responded.
The odds of anyone coming back after finding out firsthand what they bought is utter crap. It's not likely. You 2 act as if sleazy merchants setting up shop outside the most famous place in Grimner is even the least bit surprising,
Simhil said, joining the conversation.
What is surprising is that some of them are actually selling legitimate merchandise, even if it is at wildly high prices. Would you 3 shut up?
Adalia said in annoyance. She brushed her blonde hair from out of her eyes as she looked around slowly.
There is someone else here. Well, of course there is. We were sure not to be the only ones to climb,
Simhil said. Adalia ignored her and stopped her gaze on one of the violet trees just 12 yards to her left and said,
There, behind that tree, just one. I'll go check it out, see if they're friendly,
Caleb said, already heading over there. When he got to the tree, he found a young girl with red hair and freckles, sleeping peacefully. Seeing her, Caleb relaxed and turned to shout to his companions,
It's just a young girl, she's sleeping.
Moments after he shouted to his friends, the girl awoke and got to her feet, pulling out a beautiful dagger, pointing it at his throat. Caleb held his hands up and backed away slowly. Seeing the fear in the girl's eyes, he smiled lightly and said,
Hello, my name is Caleb, what's yours?
The girl said nothing, so he continued.
I'm sorry for frightening you. We noticed another presence and wasn't sure if it was friend or foe. Those are my companions back there, by the way.
Caleb nodded behind him.
The 2 ginger twins back there, whom are probably whispering something stupid about me right now, are Theo and Nethlin. And then there is tall, pretty, and brooding, her name is Adalia and she's our leader, of sorts.
He stopped backing away then as the girl stopped moving forward and glanced to his friends behind him.
Oh, and then there are the rest. Screw you, Caleb, your introduction sucks,
Simhil called out. The girl stepped back from Caleb and put away her dagger, then she turned and fled towards the stairs ascending higher. Myra snarled,
After her.
And then went to chase the girl, but Adalia grabbed her arm and stopped her, saying,
Let her go, she's of no threat to us, just a scared little girl.
Moments later the girl vanished in thin air before reaching the stairs. Myra pulled her arm free of Adalia's grip, which then loosened, and rushed over to Caleb to check on him. She had her hands all over him, checking to make sure that girl didn't stab him anywhere. He said he was fine but kept his eyes focused ahead towards the stairs. He gently pushed Myra away from him, insisting he was fine. Then he went over to Adalia and told her he was going to find that girl and help her if she could. It was more a question than him saying what he would be doing. Adalia crossed her arms and asked,
Okay, even if you can find the girl who can go invisible, then how will you help her? Give her some of my provisions, so she can make it down and out of the tower. She looked like she was out or just about. If that's the case, she won't make it down and out of here. You can't give her your provisions,
Myra protested.
And why not? They're mine and mine alone to share as I please. It's a waste, and you don't even know that girl, plus that bitch pointed a dagger at your throat, remember? She was scared and alone. I would have done the same thing. Let that stupid bitch starve then, it's her fault for coming here unprepared.
Caleb glared at Meryl.
Maybe, but just how well can you prepare for a place like this? Or maybe she did prepare best she possibly could, maybe she was robbed of her food climbing up this far. You may not understand the pain of starving, but I understand it all too well, and if ever I can help someone from never going through that, then I will, so get out of my way.
Caleb then moved past Myra and stormed ahead. Myra went to chase after him, but Adalia stopped her and said,
He will come back shortly, let's give him some time then follow after him.
She struggled, but Adalia wouldn't let go.
I thought an invisible girl would be much harder to find,
Caleb said after spotting the mysterious freckled girl. She got up and pulled her dagger out, again.
What do you want?
She asked.
Easy, I'm not here for trouble, in fact I thought you might be, so that's why I came, alone I might add. And how do you think I'm in trouble? Or are you going to say that only you and your friends can protect but only if I do something for you?
She sounded very cynical now. Caleb stepped a little bit closer to her but stopped with them still several feet apart.
No, but I noticed you don't seem to be carrying much on you save for that fancy cloak and dagger. I'm not sure how long you have been out of provisions but you can't keep climbing without food or water. I want to give you some of mine so you can climb back down with a chance to make it out before starving to death. Keep your food, I don't need it. Ah.
Caleb raised a brow curiously, he looked around then asked,
And might I ask what you plan to eat exactly?
The girl studied him for a minute then asked,
You really don't know, do you?
Caleb shook his head.
No, what?
Slowly the girl stepped away from him, keeping her eyes set on him still, and moved towards one of the violet trees. She then plucked one of the fruits and bit into it. After chewing and swallowing the bite she said, This fruit is all the food I need, I have been living off of it since I got here and feel fine. And the juices give me all the waters I need too, so no, I don't need you to continue climbing this tower. The girl then tossed Caleb the fruit and put away her dagger. She turned and started walking off again shouting,
Please stop following me now. Wait, can I at least know your name?
Caleb shouted back. The girl didn't stop moving but she did respond,
My name is Irene. Goodbye, Caleb.
She then pulled the hood up from her cloak over her head and vanished again. Caleb found the group waiting for him just at the base of the stairs on the floor below.
How much of your own provisions did you end up giving her?
Adelia asked. Caleb glared at her, annoyed at the question and said,
None, she wouldn't take them. Well, you tried, Caleb, so you don't have to feel bad when she does fade away to hunger or thirst.
Meyer said scathing.
No, as a matter of fact,
Caleb said turning to Meyer.
She's been living off that dark fruit that grows off the purple trees in this place. She said it keeps her stomach full and gives her all the waters she needs. And you believed her? It does make sense if you think about it,
Adelia said.
Thus far, we have not seen any streams, puddles, or other forms of water, but these weird trees growing all around still manage to live. I'm not sure what sort of magic this tower is, but the only way to climb to the top would have to be by eating those fruits to sustain ourselves. So what, we're going to risk our lives on the word of some random bitch we don't even know?
Meyer protested.
I mean, what if it's poisonous? If it is, then chances are no one will ever make it to the top of this tower, at least none of us anyways. But we will worry about that when our provisions run out, for now let's keep climbing, we dawdled long enough down here and I sense others not too far behind us.
The group continued on as before, when they got through the next 4 floors though everyone was out of provisions.
Alright, let's hope your redhead friend was right about these fruits,
Adelia said walking over to one of the violet trees. She plucked the purple fruit and examined it closely, then bit into it. Everyone watched with anticipation as she ate the fruit.
It seems absolutely harmless to me,
she said, then she continued to eat the fruit. Caleb followed after her and grabbed some fruit for himself and bit into it. The others soon followed.
Alright, so she was right about the fruits,
Meyer complained.
So can we all stop talking about her now? We have stopped talking about her, now it's just you,
Rowan said irritated.
Nethlin, Theo, and Caleb are still talking about her too. Yeah, well, the Ginger twins can almost never shut the hell up. And Caleb, I don't care what he has to say. All of you shut up,
Adelia said in a hushed voice. She looked behind her, her eyes went wide and she said,
Quickly everyone hide.
They followed her lead and suddenly broke off from their path, but Rowan still asked,
Hide where? Behind the fruit trees, 2 people per, and no one move or say damn thing until they have long since moved on.
Adelia responded as she pressed herself close to one of the trees and crouched way low. Everyone else followed her example, scattering throughout the many dark fruit trees around and waited to see what had Adelia so spooked. Moments later, a small group of people cloaked in crimson-red cloaks with a familiar-looking demon design on their backs. Their heads and faces were completely covered by the overly large hoods and they kept their hands up by the waist, tucking them away between the long sleeves. By appearance alone they seemed nothing special, but as they passed by they gave off a dark aura which frightened everyone around, even Adelia. When the red-cloaked group moved on, everyone let out their breath in sighs of relief. They grouped back up and Caleb asked,
Who the hell were those people and why were they so frightening? They're called the Red Wraiths,
Adelia answered.
They're a cult of powerful dark magisters, they work with ancient ritualistic magic and have a power not known to many. How come none of us heard of them before?
Simhil asked.
Because they were long before your time. I was just a child myself when the king of Dorgal waged a campaign to eliminate them all for good. Wait, Dorgal is ruled by the council, we don't have a king,
Simhil said. Adelia sighed and brushed her blonde hair out of her face and said,
that too was before your time. In fact, the council is still a very new regime.
She paused to glance around at everyone.
Wait a second, Rowan is gone, where did he run off to?
Everyone looked around them and found no sign of him. A loud piercing whistle rang their ears moments later. They turned to where it had come from and found one of the red wraiths holding Rowan with an arm twisted behind his back and a shiny blade pressed firmly against his neck.
Surrender peacefully or this one dies,
the man in the red cloak said. Soon as he finished his sentence, the others showed up surrounding the group, their magic shrouds dropped now, making them fully visible. There were a good deal more of them now than what Adelia or the others had seen passing by just minutes ago. Adelia took a look around her, seeing all the red wraiths. Using her magic to extend her senses, she felt out all of the cloaks, each of them full and brimming with life magic. They were no illusions. Reluctantly she put her hands up and told everyone to surrender peacefully.
Don't do it!
Rowan shouted in protest. Even as the dagger pushed against his throat and started cutting him dangerously close to the jugular, he protested.
Tell these corpse fuckers to go kiss a grave. Enough, Rowan, that's enough.
Adelia said as she and the others surrendered their weapons and themselves peacefully. The red wraiths thoroughly searched each of them and took all their weapons. Then they individually tied their arms behind their backs with a strange black rope which made their whole body tingle. Rowan struggled, a lot, but was still tied with the rest, and they were all marched 2 by 2 moving with the wraiths.
What are they going to do with us?
Caleb whispered quietly to Adelia, who was paired next to him.
They're going to sacrifice us for their magic, as either individuals or in one large group,
Adelia whispered back.
Then why the fuck did we just give up? Because if we fought them back there they would have slaughtered us. Right now we have a hidden gambit that gives a chance to get away from this alive. And that would be... Quiet down, you two.
One of the wraiths shouted at Caleb and Adelia. Irene followed the group in their crimson cloaks from a safe distance, watching them as they captured and detained Caleb and his friends. Just keep moving, she would tell herself every time they stopped for a short rest. They will be fine, just keep moving and get the hell out of there, this is not your problem. She finally convinced herself to move on, when they all stopped for a long rest, by reminding herself that if she didn't get ahead of them now they might get the wish before she did. But she stopped when one of the older boys, with a nasty cut on his neck, slipped free of his bondage and ran for it. He made it 12 steps before being incinerated by a blast of flame. Irene cusped her hands over her mouth to hide her gasp of terror. Now she was ready to go, there's no way she would be able to save them.
We needed that one for part of the sacrifice ritual,
one of the wraiths argued loudly. Irene kept moving on though and shook her head.
I'm just a kid from the streets, I can't do nothing against the magical people,
she said out loud to herself.
Especially ones like that.
She kept going, but she couldn't get that image of that guy being burned to ashes and then seeing Caleb and the others dying the same way. But the cloaked people were talking about a ritual sacrifice, she thought to herself. What if they're going to torture them slowly or something? She stopped, then muffled her mouth to scream in frustration. Reluctantly, she turned back around and went to where Caleb, his friends, and the red cloaks were all camped out. Most of them were lying down now, trying to rest, but a couple remained up and moving around, lookout duty. She pulled over her vanishing cloak and pulled out her dagger, then slowly moved into the group, stepping around the cloaked people as she made her way to Caleb and the others. When she got there, she cut the ropes around Caleb, who was still awake and wondering what the hell just happened since he couldn't see Irene. When he started moving around too much, she hushed him and whispered so faint he struggled to hear her.
Shut up or we'll get caught.
Caleb went back to being still after that but whispered back,
Invisible girl, I need you to grab our weapons from the brown sack they have, after you finish freeing all of us.
Irene didn't respond and moved on to the woman next to Caleb, who whispered quietly to her,
Thanks for coming back for us, kid.
She stopped cutting her ropes and thought for a long moment before asking,
You knew I was following you guys? It's a special magic talent of mine. Listen, the others are still half awake, so when you cut them free tell them Adelia sent you so they don't freak out and ruin this whole thing.
Irene cut her free and said,
Got it.
She then moved on to others and whispered the message to them before cutting their bonds. They remained silent and unmoving when she told them that, but they were wide awake now. When she freed them all, she moved on to grab the brown sack, which wasn't hard to spot among all the red cloaks lying around. She grabbed it silently and slowly moved back when the cloaked man's hand shot out and firmly grabbed her wrist. He started to get up when she kicked him in the face and pulled her hand free from him, still holding the bag. Next thing she knew, her entire body was burning as the cloak was caught in flames. She quickly removed the vanishing cloak and tossed it to the ground. The other people in the red cloaks had woken by the time Irene got the bag to Caleb.
"Thanks Irene, we have to go though,"
he said, grabbing her hand and leading her along with the group. She glanced back to see the two ginger twins staying behind. She didn't know what they were doing until they both clapped their hands together and a large sparkling ball of fire exploded before them. It was bright and extremely loud. More sparkling balls of fire exploded in succession after the first one. They did very little damage from what Irene could tell, but they gave them the perfect cover to escape. The stairs leading onto the next floor were just within their range and they rushed up them while the twins' magic still exploded behind them. While the others thought they were safe, Adelia knew they only eluded the red wraiths temporarily. It wasn't over for them yet. Chapter 22 Volga the Apprentice, Chapter 4 There seems no better way to start off your morning than finding a beautiful naked woman passed out in the bed of your former master, at least not for Volga.
"Somehow this doesn't surprise me,"
Volga said to himself.
"Hey fox girl, time to get up,"
Volga yelled at Kira. She opened her eyes casually, then let out a big yawn. Rising from the bed, Kira let what little of the covers were around her fall to the floor, showing her slender naked body off without a hint of modesty. Volga couldn't help but stare at her naked form, his hormones flaring up and getting aroused. She smirked and asked,
"Get a good look yet?"
Volga then came to his senses and his face burned red. He turned away and awkwardly cleared his throat, then said,
"What happened to the mat and blankets I gave you to sleep on?"
Kira, still making no attempt to cover herself, started stretching and said,
"It wasn't very comfy and I remembered there was an empty bed up here which no one was using, so I used it."
Volga sighed in irritation and said,
"Of course you did." "Hey Volga, are you still a virgin?"
He turned back to look at her, startled by the question. She was still standing there naked as before. He turned back away, embarrassed again, and said,
"I don't see what that has to do with anything."
Kira came up to him and wrapped her arms around him, one hand massaging his chest, the other slowly working its way down towards his crotch.
"You know,"
she whispered seductively into his ear,
"we can fix that, if you remove this band off my wrist first."
Volga, hearing the last of her sentence, suddenly sprang to life and pulled his arms off her and dashed forward. As he ran out the room and headed for the stairs, he called back,
"Thou shan't not tempt me with your sexcraft, foul seductress."
Kira giggled and thought to herself,
"Well, it's good to see the boy does have a humorous side to him, even if it's a bit droll."
She then got dressed and packed her things up in her small bag, ready to go. To her surprise, though, Volga was not ready to go right that minute. In fact, he was in the middle of making breakfast. Kira placed her bag down next to the table and asked,
"I thought we were leaving first thing in the morning."
Volga kept his attention on the food cooking at the stove and said,
"We are, but last night I was thinking, aside from just powerful warriors, we will need other strong magisters, ones with some serious firepower like myself. The crystal which contains the wish gems is not going to be easy to crack open. I don't think even weapons of pure adamantite would do a whole lot either, so it would be better to have at least a couple more powerful magisters to help with that aspect of things. So I figured we could talk it over breakfast and figure out a good place to start looking for such people."
Kira sat down in one of the chairs at the table and said,
"If I am to understand you correctly, you have not the slightest idea whom to recruit for this in addition to myself. In fact, you have no contacts, no friends to call on, no shady associate who can help you put this team of yours together." She said it as neutrally as she could, but it still came out rather bitter.
Volga hesitated to answer briefly but said,
"Yes, that is basically it, you're right."
His voice was somber and a little strained. Kira then realized that Volga was not as perfectly prepared or well planned for what lays ahead of them as she initially thought. He had good knowledge of where to go, a solid idea of what to expect, but no means on how to go about it, any of it. "I may know of where we can find 2 magisters who fit that description perfectly," Kira said cautiously. "But I cannot guarantee they would join us, or even listen to us, but it's all I got. After that we're going to have to make it up as we go along, I suppose." "Well, it's a start at least. What town are they in?"
Not town city,
Kira corrected.
And they should be in Framir. Somewhere.
Volga turned his attention away from cooking entirely and looked at Kira.
Framir?
He inquired.
As in the capital of Dorgal, Framir. That's the one. Framir is almost as far south as south goes,
Volga started to rant.
We're practically at the north border ourselves, that trip is going to take a couple months unless I can get us some horses along the way.
He stopped himself there and then took in a deep breath and let it out slow. Then he said,
You know what, it's fine. This is a lead and I expected this journey to take some time to even assemble the right members.
He finished cooking breakfast, then put even proportions on both their plates and set them down on the table. Then he poured some water into 2 cups, handed one to Kira and held his out and said,
To Framir.
Kira grinned and tapped her cup to his saying,
To the city of gold.
Volga and Kira didn't get too far their first day of travel. Even on the main road the town they left was close enough for them to still hear the sounds of the more wily people. Dusk was upon them, so they started setting up camp just off the road.
You know this journey would be way faster if we bought some horses, you certainly have the money for it,
Kira said. Volga started setting his bags down on their campsite and said,
Horses wouldn't do us much good. And why's that?
Kira asked, setting her bags down too.
Because my master never taught me how. When I asked him if I would learn how to ride a horse, he said it was a waste of time, and it was since he later taught me how to teleport. Well, that's great, then just teleport us to Framir. I can't. The only way I can only teleport somewhere is if I have been there before and have a solid image of it in my head, or if I can see it directly. Besides, I don't know if I can teleport myself and another at the same time. If I tried without practice, too much of you may be left behind.
Kira sighed and started walking off.
I'm going to gather us some firewood, I guess. While I'm gone, feel free to pitch our tents.
When Kira returned, with a bundle of logs and broken tree branches in her arms, she found the tents still unpitched, and just sitting out in the open ready to be set up. She dropped the logs off on the ground and asked sarcastically,
You're kidding, right?
Volga went to speak, but Kira held her hand up to stop him and said,
No, wait, let me guess, your master never taught you that either, since it too was a waste of time.
Volga shrugged his shoulders and said,
Yeah, more or less. You know what, it's fine, not even cold enough to need those tents. And we have enough firewood to keep the flame going all night. Yeah, that sounds pretty good to me too. With winter over and spring here, we only need a good fire on the colder nights. I'm not looking forward to hauling around these tents the whole trip anyways.
They said nothing more and Kira set up the wood for the fire. Volga ignited it with a small fireball. They sat down around the fire and Kira asked,
Can you hunt? No, you. Only treasures and sparkly things, but not food, I'm afraid. Well then, it's a good thing I stocked up on foods for this trip. I can keep most of the stuff from spoiling for a fair amount of time, but we should stop by whatever towns and travelers' inns we come across along the way to either stock up on food or save on what we have. You know, now that I think about it, we could have just hired someone to take us to the capital. Ride around in a wagon would be slower than an individual horse but faster than walking. We could still do it too.
Volga turned his head back to the town. He was considering it. He kept staring at the town thinking about it, but eventually turned away and said,
No, the money my master left me behind was his. I will use what I need of it, but I don't want to rely so much on it. I feel as if using it too much means I'm still relying on my master, even now that he's gone. So I have to stop relying on him so much as if he's still here. So should we start learning how to hunt so you don't have to keep using your master's old money?
Volga smirked and said,
I said I don't want to keep relying on him so much like he's still here, not that we should travel like we're penniless.
Kira giggled. It was the cutest thing Volga heard. He reached for his bag as a purple blur streaked past him and launched into their campfire. Whatever it was that went into the fire, exploded into a purple smoke seconds later. Volga and Kira stood up and rushed to get away from it, but they had already breathed it in and had not gotten more than a few steps before falling to their knees. Soon after they both lost consciousness. Kira woke up with a monster-sized headache with her hands bound tightly behind her in a chair. Her vision was blurry but soon cleared up and she could see Volga tied up more tightly than her in another chair across the room. From what she could see, they were in a small cabin in a back room. A single table with a few burning candles was in the room with them. Soon enough a small group of 5 men, dark clothes made of silk, came in.
So you guys took my advice on the silk wardrobe after all,
Kira said casually.
It feels nice on the skin, doesn't it? It doesn't do much for style, but yes, it does feel good,
Petrus said, coming into the room. He was a tall man with handsome rugged features and a unique scar on his left ear. He was wearing a dark silk outfit just like the others.
But we don't have to worry about that here, no one but us for miles. I'm assuming we are in your little hideaway cabin just, 8 miles east of the town you caught up to me in?
Kira asked, taking another look around the room.
Yes, very good, you remember well,
Petrus said cheerfully.
Well, you and I shared some special moments here after all. I would be hurt if you didn't recognize the place. Well then, I guess for old time's sake maybe you will let us go.
Kira asked with a smile.
You know I am in a pleasant mood tonight, so tell me where the painting is you stole from us. I didn't steal it from you, I stole it from the church,
Kira interrupted.
Though I must admit stealing from a church was probably my lowest point, not like they needed the extravagant thing anyways.
Petrus dragged out an extra chair that was sitting behind Kira's view and sat down in front of her, crossing one leg over the other.
Semantics, my dear, yes, your master craft stole the art, but it was my team's hard labor that got you in there in the first place and covered your trail. Anyways, the point is that painting was worth hundreds in gold and you decided to run off with it instead of returning it to us to split evenly. But I'm willing to overlook that and let you go, if you tell me where it is, and you and I spent one last romantic evening in bed, because I will admit I did miss you. And what about my friend over there?
Kira asked, nodding toward Volga, who was still passed out. Petrus glanced over to Volga, then back to Kira and said,
Your friend over there did some serious hurt on my boys back in that ally, it's only fitting we pay him back.
Kira glared at Petrus, her mood shifting to anger fast.
He's just a kid, you don't need to hurt him. And instead, how about I tell you where the map is, sleep with you once more and you let us both go, and we pay you 50 gold pieces now. Better yet,
Petrus said, agitated.
We stop messing around and you tell me where the map is. And maybe we'll spare the kid you're so fond of. Maybe even when I'm done with you I won't let my boys fuck you into the ground.
Kira shook her head slowly and said,
Just remember, I gave you a choice.
When nothing happened for half a minute, Petrus smirked and the other men started to laugh lightly. Then swiftly Kira rose from her chair, free of her bonds, and turned to grab her chair and break it over Petrus as he quickly got up. Before he even fell to the floor, Kira was off, running to the door and heading for the main room. The men followed her, and instead of going for the door outside, she went towards the bedroom. In there, she found the pair of scimitars hanging cross on the wall just above the bed. She leaped onto the bed and pulled them down with ease. She then went for the door as the first man came in, blocking her way. With a quick and well-executed swing, she sliced open the man's throat. Blood sprayed out from the jugular as he fell to the ground dead. The next man wasn't too far behind the first, and Kira slashed open his throat as well. This time she was close enough to get caught in some of the blood spray even as the man fell backwards.
Well, this outfit will need a thorough washing after this,
Kira said to herself, irritated as she stepped outside the bedroom. The others, including Petrus, were out into the main room now. Seeing Kira with the twin blades, they pulled out their knives. Slowly Kira started to step sideways towards the corner when two of the men charged at her, their knives held out in front of them. They had longer arms, but Kira had swords where they had knives, and she was far quicker. She dashed at the man on her right and spun half around, slicing off his hand holding the knife. Then she slammed the bottom of the sword into his throat and knocked him on his back. The other man, now in more favorable position, tried to lunge for Kira, but she quickly kicked out her leg and hit his crotch with the bottom of her foot. He fell to his knees and she sliced across his eyes. She then faced directly toward Petrus and his last man left.
You know,
she said.
You shouldn't have threatened my young friend back there.
Petrus and the other man held up their hands, slowly backing away from her as she held one blade up and pointing at them, and the other to her side, stepping forward. She stopped and turned to the other man and said,
I'll make you a deal, kick Petrus over here and I will let you run away with your life.
Before Petrus could even turn to speak, his own man booted him in the back and flung him towards Kira. He then turned to flee outside. Petrus landed on his knees, and as he looked up to beg for his life, Kira swung the blade and lopped off his head. She then brought up the blood-soaked scimitars to her eyes and said to herself,
These things are fantastic, I am so taking them with me.
Volga woke up with his head in agony, like a hangover multiplied by 1,000. His vision was blurry for the first minute he opened his eyes. When he could see properly, he found Kira standing in the doorway of whatever room they were in now. Her casual smile kept him from panicking when he realized what had happened and that they were no longer at their campsite. He slowly rose to his feet and rubbed his head and asked,
"What happened to us, after that sleep smoke surrounded us, I mean?" Well, those guys you met in the alley where you rescued me found us and waited until we were vulnerable to strike. Then they dragged our unconscious bodies here, tied us in chairs, and when I woke up I escaped the ropes, broke my chair over their leader's head and then ran into the bedroom to grab the twin blades above the bed. After that I killed them all, except one who sold his boss out for his own life."
Volga just stared at her wide-eyed through her story and took notice, for the first time, of the blood spatters on her clothes and the pair of swords hanging around her back.
"Don't believe me? Come take a look,"
Kira said, opening the door and standing aside. Volga went to the other, main, room and found it was exactly as she said, dead bodies lying around in a pool of blood, one of them missing a head. Volga turned away disgusted and headed for the open door leading outside. Kira chased after him and asked,
"I hope this doesn't change anything between us."
Volga took in a few deep breaths once outside and thought carefully about his answer. Then he said,
"No, I should get used to this sort of thing, even if it is the worst I may ever see, in preparation for the tower. God only know what awaits us in there. Let me ask you something though. Back in the Ally, you didn't really need my help, did you?" "No, I could have handled it, although it would have been much harder than this situation. Long story short, I know this little cabin, and after I slipped my bonds I knew there would be these blades waiting for me, and I'm also very well versed in sword dancing. My advantage was overwhelming." "That sounds like quite the story for you. Tell me, I mean, how you know how to use those swords so well,"
Volga said. Kira stepped outside with a lantern and led Volga to the side of the cabin where 5 horses were tied up to a long rail.
"Not really, but I'll tell you anyways. Let me just get these horses first."
Then she cut the ropes off 3 of them and untied the other 2. She walked them forward and handed Volga the reins to one of them.
"But I don't know how to ride,"
Volga said.
"I can start teaching you tomorrow, but for tonight we will just walk back to camp. Hopefully our stuff is still there,"
Kira said, pushing the reins into Volga's hands. Kira moved ahead and Volga tugged on the reins once while he followed after her. The horse obediently walked beside him.
"It's going to be more expensive to feed and stable the horses at each stop, you know,"
Volga said, trying his best to make a valid argument.
"Yes, but the journey will be 3 times faster at least,"
Kira countered. She had a point, so Volga moved on.
"Alright then, how about that story of yours? Feel free to add in why those people wanted you so bad too." "Well,"
Kira said, thinking back.
"After I lost my magic, or rather had it sealed, I felt I needed to compensate for it, so I learned how to dance with swords. My dancing instructor, or sword master as some would call him, was rather expensive, and after my lessons were complete I had barely any money to get a single meal, and that's when Petrus found me. He somehow recognized me as the fox and offered me a job to steal a very valuable painting. It was a team effort, and though I wasn't nearly as skilled without my magic I pulled it off. But I had to hide the painting in a safe place before I could get back to them because the city watch was hot on my tail and I was pegged as a person of interest in the theft of that painting. I got back to the crew after the guards discovered I didn't have the painting, at least not on hand, and I played innocent not knowing what they were talking about. Anyways, I told Petrus and the others about what happened, and me and Petrus spent some time here in this cabin while we waited for things to calm down back in the city. We were only here a week since the trip took us about as long, but in that time I learned about how Petrus and the others got me into the church to steal the painting." "Wait a second, you stole from a church?"
Volga interrupted. Kira just shrugged and continued on.
"It was easily the lowest point in my life, I will admit. Anyways, as I was saying, I had learned Petrus and his men killed the 3 bishops that were on the late ceremony detail. That's why the guards were so desperate to find the thief who stole the art, because they thought the same person committed the murders. Of course back then I was much more reserved about killing, especially bishops. I may never have been a godly person, but the bishops were people who would give up everything they had in service to God and only offered goodwill towards others from what I always seen of them. To me, of all the people in the world you would kill for monetary gain, bishops shouldn't even be at the bottom of the list, they should be off it entirely. But after I learned this I snuck off in the night while Petrus was asleep, and stole the single horse we rode on and went back to the city. I retrieved the painting in secret and visited the Archbishop of the city and returned it to him personally. I told him the truth, that I had no idea how things would go down, and told him about Petrus and his men killing the 3 bishops. After that I disappeared. Until they found me again the same night you stumbled into the alley. I told them just moments ago I hid the painting, guess they didn't realize I gave it back to the church."
Volga was silent for a time after Kira told her tale. He waited patiently until he felt it was right to ask her the last thing that was on his mind. When he felt enough time was passed, he spoke up asking,
"And the killing, when did you become less reserved about that?" "I don't know, I guess it happened along the way of surviving after all that ordeal. I learned the hard way that some people must be killed, otherwise they will take everything from you,"
Kira said cynically.
"Anyways, what I did back there to Petras and his men, they deserved no less than that. I did give them an opportunity to walk away, but they didn't take it. I didn't directly kill all of them, though I let one go and left a few others for dead."
The two of them remained silent until reaching their old campsite. They found their fire still going with some very small embers left.
"Well, good news is we were not gone more than a few hours or so from the looks of the fire,"
Volga said.
"And the great news is all our stuff is still here,"
Kira said, her tone more cheery. She turned to Volga and asked,
"Think you will be able to get any sleep after all that's happened?"
Volga added more logs to the pile on top of the smoldering embers and relit the fire, then said,
"It may be hard, but I might. What about the horses? What are we to do with them? We can't tie them up anywhere so they don't run off. They seem well trained, and it's the middle of the night, so running off will be against their more baser instinct, at least until morning. Besides, if they do and I can't catch them, then we will just continue on foot like before."
Volga didn't respond to her, not until he checked all their stuff, well his, to make sure everything was still there. It all was, and he looked at her, still thinking about his answer.
All right,
he said, partially reluctant.
"We will try the horses if they don't run off, and if you keep an eye out for any other friends of yours while I try to get some sleep."
Kira smirked but said,
"Yeah, that sounds fair enough."
Volga then lay down and was asleep within a few very short minutes. Kira watched him while he slept, his peaceful face at rest, and she realized that he really was just a boy. He had grown up in a comfortable yet unspoiled life, and now he was all alone with no guidance. Of course, she knew all too well that many children near or even younger than he were forced to grow up fast, but he still had some ways to go. Chapter 23 The Frigid Prince, Chapter 4
"You there, stop,"
Anagil called out to the night. No response, he kept on going with his whistling.
"Boris of Jair."
Boris stopped after that, and turned around slowly to face Anagil and the others. After sizing them up, he grinned and said,
"Ha, I have not used that name in some time." "So you're really him?"
Boris smirked.
I'm him. I certainly had quite the reputation if someone young as you has heard of me. But I don't understand, you're supposed to be dead."
Boris laughed as if Anagil just told him the most hilarious joke he ever heard. When he settled down, he said,
"I am dead, I'm just waiting for it to be permanent." "I don't understand, if you're still alive, then why didn't you return to Aladern? Why didn't you return to the king?"
Boris scoffed and said,
"Fuck the king. Me and so many others give him our lives for his invasion plan, and he gets beat by some snot-nosed little shit." "Shut your mouth,"
Anagil commanded.
"Whoa, did I strike a nerve there?"
Boris asked sardonically.
"You're old enough to be a knight but seem too young to be such a loyalist, so who are you anyways, kid?" "I sir am Prince Anagil Tarok. Youngest son of the greatest king Aladern has seen before." "So that's what it is then, eh?"
He scoffed.
"Aberon's not worthy of the title to be king, he's an insult to all of Aladern."
Without warning, Anagil attacked, thrusting his ice lance at Boris' stomach. Boris twisted sideways, narrowly avoiding the attack, and pulled his sword, swiftly swinging it down at Anagil in the same position. Anagil was forced to retreat back, but the blade still grazed him across his cheek. Boris followed up by spinning around on his toes and slashing at Anagil again. Anagil kept backing up as Boris twirled and slashed his sword at Anagil, giving him no time to counter. When his back hit against the tree, Boris went in for the kill, thrusting his sword end at Anagil's head. Anagil tiled half his body to one side, narrowly avoiding the thrust as the sword stabbed through the tree. Boris then slammed his head into Anagil's face, knocking him on his back. He pulled his sword from the tree and Anagil thrust out his free hand. Boris, somehow sensing the danger, quickly shuffled to the side, dodging the incoming surge of ice magic. Though his attack missed, Anagil bought enough time to get back on his feet and face Boris. Boris' face had a certain look of mixed terror and rage on his face now. Aggravated, he swung his sword at Anagil, aiming to lop his head off. Anagil blocked with his ice lance, and as the two clashed together they rang a high pitch. The grey sword then turned a shade lighter and began to crack, before Boris could pull it back the sword exploded into a dozen shards. Inagil didn't hesitate to thrust his lance into Boris' stomach. He then leaned in closer and said through gritted teeth,
"You're no knight of a Latern."
Boris grabbed the lance and pulled it in further, forcing Inagil to step closer. They were now face to face and he said,
"And you're no son of the king. You're a freak, just like them."
He then jabbed his hand into Inagil's throat and pushed him back. He let go his lance and started coughing, struggling to breathe normally. Boris pulled the lance out of his stomach, his hands now a dark purple, and fled. No one there chased him. Now that the fight was over, his friends approached him.
"You all right, man?"
Yadril asked, concerned.
"I'm fine,"
Inagil said, retrieving his lance.
"You sure?"
Curtis asked.
"That was a pretty intense battle."
"It was," he sighed.
"My reflexes are crap. I need to get faster or find a way to compensate with some sort of armor."
They moved on after that, and all but Matthias and Inagil began talking casually amongst themselves.
"So you're a prince, hey?"
Matthias asked, trying to spark up a conversation with Inagil.
"Yeah, one of 6 others,"
Inagil said.
"And you're from a Latern?" "Yes, so what?" Nothing, it's just I thought you were like a noble from Dorgal or something. I mean, your magic is so powerful in a Latern, well, they are now known for magisters there. I'm just surprised is all. They must really miss you back home." "Just the opposite, I'm sure,"
he said, affirmed.
"I was always an outcast because of my magic and always hated having it. But since I have embraced it, and accepted it as part of me, it's become so much stronger."
Matthias smiled and said,
"Well, my friend, maybe one day you will become the king."
When they found the next stairs leading up, they were all too tired to climb them and made camp within sight of them. And after settling down and eating, Yadril asked,
"So Mr. Prince, what would you wish for?"
Inagil just scoffed and shook his head, a small grin breaking on his lips.
"Aw, come on, man, for real, what would you wish for if you reach the top first?"
Inagil thought about the answer for a while before saying,
"Honestly, I don't know. I'm climbing the tower to get the wish for my father to make him proud of me, never really thought about what else it could do for me. It's sad really, my whole life all I've been trying to do is make him proud. And maybe show up my brothers along the way."
They all smiled a little after that last comment but were silent for a time. Then Inagil spoke up, asking,
"What would you guys do if you got the wish?"
None of them answered, and he said,
"Nope, you guys have to open up, I can't do all the wishing here. You all must have something you really want that is impossible to get otherwise." "Alright, I'd wish for a castle filled with gold and diamonds,"
Yadril said.
"That way the guys would respect me and the ladies would have no excuse to try and resist my irresistible charms."
Matthias, Curtis, and Igor laughed.
"You right, you a ladies' man?"
Matthias asked sarcastically.
"You have not gotten laid in months, fool." Alright, laugh it up, tee hee hee,"
Yadril said, annoyed.
"But guess what, Matthias, it's your turn to share."
After they calmed down, Matthias said,
"That's easy, I would wish for ultimate power. I could do whatever I wanted then. How about you, Igor, what would you wish for?" "Aside from a full head of hair."
They all chuckled at Matthias' joke.
"I would probably wish for eternal youth. Ultimate power would be too much for me to handle and immortality would drive me insane. But I think a few extra lifetimes of being young would satisfy me, and allow me to do all the things I wanted before dying."
Everyone turned to Curtis, now whose face grew a little somber, and he looked down at his feet. In a sad and quiet tone he said,
"I'd wish for my parents back to life."
They were all quiet after that until Inagil said,
"Alright, let's get some rest now. Matthias, you take first watch, and this time don't fuck it up. And after about 5 hours, wake me up and I'll take over from there."
Inagil later awoke to all the others talking amongst themselves casually. When he moaned a little and started to get up, Matthias said mockingly,
"His Highness awakens at last."
Inagil shook off his wariness and said,
"I told you to wake me later to change out." "You did,"
Matthias confirmed.
"But I decided you needed the rest more than I, so I stayed up and kept watch while everyone slept. And when the others woke before you, I got some sleep myself. I woke up not long before you. You must have been really exhausted to sleep so long." "No, Normally I sleep for excess periods of time, but usually I get in about a full day and night's worth of sleep so I can keep functioning longer." I remember when I was younger I could sleep for days without knowing it, I'd be awake for a long time after that though. Well, that's good to know I guess. You should eat though before we do anything,
Matthias said. Inagil plucked a couple of the dark fruits and devoured them ravenously. When he finished, Matthias approached him again and said,
"Well, it's good you have your appetite, that's a sign of healthiness. But we have a problem." "What is it this time?" "While we were sleeping, Yadril went searching around for the next set of stairs leading up. He found them, but there is a large encampment of soldiers just before them. A good number of men were on watch-out duty while the rest slept. They were far enough from the stairs that we could probably sneak around them to climb, but I wanted to wait until you woke up to ask your opinion on it. I will have to look for myself and see the situation before I can make an affirmed decision. But the easiest route would be for me to just freeze them all and we simply continue on."
Inagil followed Yadril over to the camp and Matthias asked,
"You can do that?" "If I get the drop on them, yeah. But if they see me coming, they will start shooting arrow or flinging spears at me before I get half of them, I'm sure."
Over at the encampment, Inagil saw the battalion of soldiers. Yadril was not kidding, they were quite intimidating in their large numbers and more. All the men were rugged, hard-looking at war, full plate steel. The craftsmanship and style looked very familiar to Inagil. By now the men had all woken up and were sitting around eating the dark fruits. The more Inagil stared at them, the more familiar they all seemed. Only when he spotted their flag bearer did he understand why. The dark blue flag had 3 weapons of a hammer, double-sided axe, and a broadsword crossing over an enclosed fist pumping into the air, the Tarok family banner. Inagil stepped out from between the trees they were all hiding behind, walking hastily over to the soldiers. Reluctantly, his friends followed him, trying to stop him. He shrugged them off and said,
"That's my family banner. That means at least one of my family is here."
When the guards saw them approaching, they shouted,
"Who goes there?"
Inagil stopped as they raised their spears, and a few knocked their arrows to their bows and aimed at him.
"Who's in charge here?"
Inagil shouted out to them all.
"We won't ask again, who goes there?"
One of the guards shouted in a more hostile tone than before. Inagil took a few steps forward, his friends didn't follow.
"You are addressing Prince Inagil Tarok, 7th son to your king. Now I demand you show me who's in charge here."
The soldiers began talking amongst themselves, and the ones holding weapons towards Inagil relaxed. Before long the soldiers started parting out of the way, and from the crowd of them emerged ARan and Rathel. Inagil was perplexed to see not just his brother but his father there too.
"Father? What are you doing here?"
ARan scoffed and said,
"I could ask the same thing. Didn't you get my letter?" "I did, but how did you get past the wall?"
Inagil smirked and said,
"I used my magic."
ARan shook his head and said,
"You shouldn't be here. You're not ready to take on these challenges that lie ahead." "Gods, you just can't have any faith in me, father. You know I have changed so much these last few months. I'm not the same timid boy I was before, I'm a man now. And you say I'm not ready for what lies ahead? Well, take another look around you, because you're the one who brought an entire battalion of men to climb this tower. You may look at me now and feel ashamed or whatever it is you have always felt of me. But I swear the next time we meet you will look upon me with pride."
Inagil then turned and walked away, heading for the stairs. All his friends but Matthias followed right behind him.
"Can I ask you about a former knight of yours, sir?"
Matthias asked.
"That's the king you're talking to, show some respect,"
Rathel said.
"I'm sorry, we don't have kings back in Dorgal. I don't know the customary for talking to one." "It's fine, boy,"
ARan said.
"Get on with your question." "I wanted to ask you about Boris of Jair. A very fine knight, his death was a great loss to our kingdom, one of the best fighters we had." "That's what I wanted to ask you about. We met a man whom Inagil believed was Boris and only responded when called by his name, Boris of Jair. He said something about him being dead already and fought with Inagil. He was defeated and retreated. Must have been an impostor. Boris is dead, I quite assure you. He was a savage-looking man with numerous scars on his face and a bear design embossed over his breastplate,"
Matthias said, describing the man they met. ARan glared at him now and his tone turned hostile.
"You best catch on up with your friends, boy."
Matthias took the hint and said,
"He was here in the tower when we last saw him,"
before running along to catch up with the others. As Aberon watched the young man swiftly jog away towards the stairs, Rathel asked,
"What's wrong, father?" His description fit Boris well, but his tale sounds like an absolute delusion. Anyone could be impersonating the dead knight. Even so, I cannot shake this horrible feeling about this news. Something strange is going on here in this tower, something dark. Your father is quite the intimidating man,
Curtis said while they climbed the stairs.
You're telling me,
Inagil said.
One day though I'll change the way he looks at me.
Onto the next floor, they found the ground was a solid rock and filled with numerous steaming springs.
Whoa, nice, some hot springs.
Yadriel said, excited.
Yo man, I bet there will be killer babes around here. We don't have time to take a bath,
Inagil said, irritated.
He's right,
Matthias said, coming up to them from behind.
We should keep moving and get some distance between us and Inagil's father, and all his men.
Yadriel sighed but gave no further word about it.
This floor seems straightforward. Yadriel, think you can just teleport us ahead a good distance?
Matthias asked.
Yeah, I can, there's nothing hindering my visuals, but where to? As far as you can, straight from the stairs behind us. I get the feeling that the next stairs are just right ahead, but pretty far off. Alright boss, everyone grab on tightly.
Inagil watched as everyone took a tight hold of Yadriel, either around his arms or waist, and looked at him expectantly.
Yadriel needs us to have a strong grip on him, or him on us, before he can safely teleport us anywhere.
Matthias explained. Still perplexed by the idea, Inagil hesitated to go through with it but eventually put his arm around Yadriel.
Alright, I'm ready, I guess.
An instant later, Inagil felt his whole body distort and stretch out, coming apart and then being put back together. When his senses returned enough, he could see he was standing within a short walking distance of some ascending stairs, and that he still had an arm wrapped around Yadriel and was gripping onto him tightly. He let go and tried to take a step back but fell to his hands and knees, the world around him spinning. Yadriel knelt down and patted his back gently.
It's alright bro, give it a minute. You will come to your senses soon, just wait till everything stops spinning before you stand up again.
Inagil took in a few steady and deep breaths before slowly getting to his feet. He didn't try walking again.
Is it like that every time?
He asked, weary.
Nah, first time is the worst. I was a wreck when I first ported, didn't know what it was or how to control it. But I got the hang of it eventually, and after that it was nothing but fun.
After Inagil got back to his full senses, they moved on. The distinct howling of wolves pierced through the darkened areas of that floor, sending a chill up everyone's spine, except Inagil. While the others walked forward carefully, keeping their eyes on the darkness, Inagil steadily walked beside it, listening in on the wolves' howling. Spotting the cave in the wall above, Curtis shouted, "Guys up there!
That's our way out!"
They looked up to it and started to run to it until Inagil shouted,
"Hold up everyone!"
They stopped and looked at him but were antsy to keep going.
"These aren't wolves howling in there, it's all some kind of trick,"
he said.
"You sure? They sound a hell of a lot like wolves to me,"
Curtis said frightfully.
"Have you ever actually heard wolves before?"
Inagil retorted.
"No." "Well, I have, hunted a pack of them as well. I assure you these are not wolves."
The group still looked frightened, so Inagil sighed and said,
"Fine, I'm going to go in there and find what's making that noise."
He turned from them, ignoring their protests, and walked boldly into the darkness. He couldn't see a thing in there and could only hear the false wolves howling. He tried shouting out to them to insult them, but his voice didn't come out, though he could feel the sensation of shouting in his throat. This floor just becomes stranger and stranger, he thought. Onward he followed the howling wolves. The closer to the source he got, the louder they were. Still, though, they kept the same synchronization and pattern of howling, like a master dancer, following the same steps over and over, never missing the beat. He readied his ice lance as the howls were now next to him. With nothing else to do, he charged forward with his lance held in front of him. He kept going until suddenly emerging from the dark and into the light. Just ahead of him were the stairs leading on up. He looked back into the darkness and chuckled a little, then went back to retrieve his friends. He found them at the base of the wall with the cavern in it. Curtis was already climbing up it and halfway there when he returned.
"Hey cowards, I found the way up to the next floor,"
he shouted to them.
"Yo man, I wasn't worried for you at all,"
Yadriel said as he walked up to them.
"You're right, you were practically jumping up this wall when he went in there,"
Curtis called down mockingly.
Oh yeah? Well, look who's climbing it. Both of you enough,
Inagil said, growing annoyed with them.
I found the way up, so let's move. Okay.
Curtis sighed and called down,
Alright, let me just see what's up here, okay? I'm already over halfway there now.
Inagil said nothing and Curtis continued up. When he reached the top to peek his head over inside, he screamed and lost his grip and fell. He landed hard on his back and was breathing fast in a panic.
What's up there?
Inagil asked.
Shit, there was fucking skull right at the top there, and this huge puddle of blood.
Curtis said, still panicking.
Make sure he's alright,
Inagil said as he started climbing the wall. He made it up to the cavern in no time and raised his head over inside. It was dark and hard to see in very far, but Inagil could indeed see the head of a human corpse and the puddle of maroon blood. The rancid smell of death filled his nostrils. He climbed down a little ways but then dropped the rest, landing on his feet with a loud thud.
Is he alright?
Inagil asked, looking over to Curtis.
I'll be fine,
Curtis said,
just caught by surprise is all. Well, there are definitely dead people up there. I don't know what killed them, but I don't want to try and find out. Now, let's move on from this floor already. You mean like go into that darkness with the wolves?
Igor asked, frightful.
Again, there are no wolves in there, it's all just a trick. And yes, through there is the only way to the stairs. Just follow the howling of the fake wolves, keep going until you emerge in the light. I'll be on the other side waiting for you guys. Don't take too long.
Inagil then went into the darkness, leaving the others with only the choice to turn back now, or follow him in. After some contemplation they followed him in. On the other side Gidriel was the first to make it out and said,
Oh sweet merciful God, you do not disappoint. I pray to you, and my prayers have been answered, I'm out of that dark nightmare.
Matthias emerged not long after that, later followed by Curtis. They waited for Igor now but began to grow anxious when he didn't emerge for a while.
You think he's alright?
Curtis asked, to no one in particular. Seconds later Igor's blood-curdling scream answered for them. Chapter 24 Thrain and Company, Chapter 8 Arriving on the next floor, Rugal and Garen gently set down Iris and Vera and used their bags for makeshift pillows. Then, alongside everyone else, they sat down exhausted, ready to sleep right there. Thrain remained seated but looked around the floor they were on. It was dimly lit, but he could see that ahead lay some sort of dark chasm, almost like an abyss. Over it was a narrow set of rock paths curving and sometimes zigzagging around, each connecting to a flat level spire. The path beyond was through those narrow walkways. It seemed very straightforward, but one misstep and you could fall to your doom. Before too long Vera and Iris woke up. They seemed fine, just more tired than the others. Except Vera, who threw a mild tantrum with what little energy she had to spare.
I am so ready to be done with this nightmare of a tower,
Vera said to one in particular.
We've been in here for months now, it's probably fall outside. I haven't had a bath in forever, but on top of all of this those creepy demons are waiting on about every other floor now just to kill us. I just want to wake up in my bed and this will all be a bad dream. Go outside and find no tower in the distance and see the sun again, or the open sky. This place fucking sucks.
When Vera finished blowing off her steam, Adeline pulled her aside for a word in private, far away from the group so they couldn't hear them talking. After they stopped walking, Vera sighed and said,
Look, I'm sorry to rant and I know everyone's probably feeling the same thing. But I just don't know how much more of this I can take.
Adeline shook her head and said,
That's not what I wanted to talk to you about.
She then rolled up her sleeve and unwrapped the linen bandage she had wrapped tightly around her wrist, revealing the red and green mixed vein slowly climbing up her arm.
One of the spiders bit right through my bracer,
she explained.
I tried removing the poison best I could and even put some of my rare herbal medicine on it, but it's only stopped it from spreading, for now.
Vera cusped her hand over her mouth when she saw the wound, her eyes widened and she struggled just to keep looking at the wound. Seeing her face, Adeline asked,
That bad, huh? Can you do anything about it?
She dropped her hand away from her mouth and said,
If I had gotten to it within a few minutes, sure, but...
She had trouble saying more and Adeline urged her to continue.
But at this stage, short of removing half your arm, there is nothing I can do from in here. If we don't leave right now and get you back to the capital with some real healers, then you will die from this. The moment the poison reaches your heart, it will infect the rest of you and you'll be dead in a couple very agonizing minutes. You sound like you know a lot about this, why can't you heal it? Master Cameron taught me about it years ago. It's an ancient venom once found in special insect which had gone extinct years ago. But some mages in Dorgal have been able to recreate the venom and have used it in their wars years ago. It's been outlawed since, but few of us still study it in case it ever returns. I can slow it down drastically, but the more you move about the faster it will spread even with my magic.
She looked into the ranger's eyes and said,
But Adeline, at the pace we're going, I can only give you a couple more weeks max, after that you will be dead. Our only choice is to get you out of here and back to the capital or to cut the arm off. No. No. I can't do anything without both my arms.
She protested. Vera frowned at the ranger's stubbornness.
I knew what I was getting into when I came here. None of knew what we were getting when we came here,
she interrupted. Adeline continued regardless,
just slow down the poison best you can, please.
Vera sighed.
I will do the best I can, but we should at least tell the group about this. No, if they find out about this, they will start acting protective of me and will lose focus. For now I need you to keep this between us, until it's too late to hide and I become useless anyways. I don't like that plan a whole lot, but if that's what you want, I will keep my mouth shut for now.
Vera then grabbed Adeline's wrist and started working her magic on the wound. The poison veins didn't recede, but the pain faded, the puncture marks were closed up. Still exhausted, Vera said,
All right, I did what I could, but a couple weeks isn't a lot of time, so try not to push yourself more than you must. I'm going to go lay down now, and rest some more.
None of them could help but lean their heads over the edge and stare blankly into the dark abyss on that floor. Everyone was ready to move on after some due rest, but their bellies were all empty, and they saw no signs of any of the dark fruit trees on that floor either. They double-checked around the area to see if there was another way to move ahead, but it was evident that they could only cross the abyss on the narrow rock paths above it. Thrain walked along the path to the first flat spire before anyone else, to test if it could support his weight. When he made it, to what Iris dubbed as the rest zone or the flat top spire, he called for the others to follow. Walking one by one, ranging from the lightest person in front to the heaviest in the back, they crossed the abyss. Making it to the first rest zone, they finalized the lineup, putting Garen right in front of Kurth and Thrain between him and Rugal. Lessa, being the lightest, walked in front. Lessa had no problems walking across the narrow paths and moved swiftly with grace and silence. Vera and Iris kept their arms out to the side to help their balance as they moved along, and Adeline just walked along it casually. The men had to walk slower, Kurth most of all, but found little trouble through most of the crossing. The crossing, at their pace, was simple but a little tedious and rather boring, they soon found. So the girls started making light conversation, but no one else would really humor them, so it was just Iris and Vera. When they got to the rest zone, before the curving and zigzagging paths, Adeline told them to start walking in a crouch to be safer. Vera shrugged the idea off and started walking the curved path, with her arms out to her sides as always before, until she started leaning off the path and almost lost all balance. Then she stopped and crouched down.
Alright, yeah Adeline, I think a crouch walk is best for here.
Finally, they all made it to the last rest zone. One single long line of the narrow rock path lay between them and the other side of the abyss, where they could see the next stairs openly. Lessa had long since crossed over there and was in fact walking on the path just for fun while she waited for the others. Everyone glared at her a little jealous. Iris and Vera made it down the path first, moving quicker than before just so they could get to the end, to safety. When the two were safely on the other side, they turned to watch the others come.
Almost there, guys,
Iris called out with an encouraging voice.
There is nothing to it,
Vera said a little mockingly.
Yes, so safe, the girls not walking around in an extra 30 pounds of armor,
Garen replied. He went to say more but lost his balance for a moment and started wobbling, flailing his arms to keep from falling as he ended up leaning backwards and over the abyss. Everyone stopped and watched him, partially petrified, until Thrain hit him in the back with the flat of his blade, pushing him forward enough to reclaim his lost balance. Garen then smiled at everyone and waved.
I'm alright, it's fine,
he called out.
Okay, I think we should stop talking until we make it across this starting now,
Rugal said. They nodded and continued on. Adeline walked a little faster, but as she put her weight down her next step, closer to the edge, the rocks crumbled beneath her foot in an instant and she lost all balance and fell sideways. Desperately, she shot her hands out to reach for the ledge. Catching it only with her right hand, a loud pop came from her shoulder and she yelped in pain.
There's some invisible force pulling me down, I can't get up,
Adeline cried. Rugal rushed over to her fast as he could and grabbed her arm to pull her up. He couldn't get into a good enough position on the narrow path and was unable to pull her up alone.
Shit, she's right, I can feel something heavier pulling her down. Thrain, help me pull her up.
Thrain came over to her soon as he could and she reached her other hand up to him. But instead of grabbing for it right away he looked down at her, hesitating to act. In his moment of hesitation Adeline could see it in his eyes, his thoughts about abandoning her there to fall. For a moment she thought he'd do it too until he swiftly reached down and grabbed her hand. Together he and Rugal pulled her up and she wrapped her arms tightly around the prince. He patted her back and said, "It's all right, you're safe now, let's get to the other side." Rugal and Adeline held hands all the way along the rest of the path, in case either of them fell again. Once safely on the other side the girls all group hugged the two and Adeline popped her shoulder into place. Thrain made it over shortly after and Kurth was still on his way taking his sweet steady time. They watched with anticipation as the large man made his final steps on the path and onto the other end. With all of them safely across, Rugal started to laugh lightly and said,
"Out of everything we've been through up to here, who would have guessed that we would all almost die just by a little bit of walking?"
It wasn't funny but most of them laughed, save for Garen and Thrain. When the laughter calmed down, Garen pulled Adeline aside for a private word. They went a fair distance from the group, but still Garen kept his voice low as he asked,
"He hesitated, didn't he? Thrain, I mean, when he went to pull you up."
Adeline glanced over to the group, saw that Thrain wasn't even paying them any attention and in a quiet tone said,
"Yes, he did. I have been apprenticed with him for a little longer than Rugal, but I'm one of the few people who has ever seen him hesitate for anything in his life. He's a man of immediate action, but he does try to think ahead when there is time for it. But there is more, isn't there?"
Adeline looked like she wanted to just forget about it, but she was compelled now to tell Garen the truth.
"I saw it in his eyes, when he hesitated, he was considering letting me drop."
Garen's eyes widened at the revelation, he didn't think it was that bad.
"I don't want to believe it, even now, but I think Thrain is starting to go mad. This place, it's been doing something to us, all of us, but I think it's affecting him worse than us. He's not acting like the Lord Commander, or the man I know." "You're right, I remember when I first agreed to join him, but I wanted Lessa at my side too. He would have went on for days arguing with me about letting someone as young as her come here, if he had the time, but he didn't have much other choice, he needed me to join. Now though he's putting her head first into all this danger, no reluctance or care for her safety. And then there was that time in the swamp when he..."
Adeline stopped and bit her lip trying not to say more.
"Go on,"
Garen said, gently trying to talk her into continuing her story.
"Just recently in the swamp floor, when we were all asleep, I woke up for an unknown reason and felt something disturbing was going on. I woke up to find everyone but Kurth asleep, he was awake on watch duty. I went to talk to him until I heard Thrain whispering quietly in his sleep. It sounded like he was talking to someone but it was hard to make out. I slowly got closer to him. When I could make out the last words he said, 'I can't kill them, they're my friends, my comrades.' He said nothing more after that, least that I could hear."
Garen felt torn inside hearing that. It was the final nail in the coffin. Now he had no doubts that Thrain really was losing his mind, but it was worse than he had known.
"I think we should start keeping a more watchful eye on Thrain from here on out, for the sake of all ourselves. I hate to say it, but our own commander may pose the greatest threat to us in here."
None of them thought they would miss the dark fruit trees as much as they did until having the map sent for a couple floors. Given how abundant they were before, it was something easy to take for granted. Now though, when they made it to the next floor and found the trees, they devoured the fruits from them and started plucking the rest and putting it in their bags where they had room. When they finished, everyone walked over towards the rushing river that lay before the next stairs. The current looked very strong and the waters stretched out for hundreds of feet, swimming across would be near impossible. On the right side, higher up on the wall, the water flowed down the tiny jagged crystals that formed the walls and ceiling of that floor. The current just, after the waterfall, shouldn't be as powerful as it was, but clearly there was strong magic at work keeping it that way.
"Well, time to give up and go home, we gave it our best,"
Iris said.
"What be your problem, young missy?"
Kurth asked.
"Out of all the thing we faced before, a lil water got ya scarred the most." "She doesn't know how to swim,"
Rugal said, wrapping an arm around Iris and pulling her close to him.
"Even if she did, we can't swim across this,"
Thrain said.
"These rapids are too strong for us to clear, especially with that great of a distance. Vera, can't you and Iris just create some sort of bridge or something for us?"
Garen asked. Vera looked at Garen, crooked her head to the side and said sarcastically,
"Sure, and while we're at it, why don't we conjure us up some juicy strips of bacon? Ah, and perhaps some eggs to go with it too, maybe a goblet of wine to drink it down."
Garen rolled his eyes and said,
"Look, I was just asking for us to create a magical bridge, I know,"
Vera interrupted.
"And just what do you think we could make this bridge out of? Perhaps we could freeze the water over and above it and walk down a bridge of ice. Not ridiculous enough for you? Well then how about instead we make it out of thin air?"
She shouted out the last two words. The others had come over to Garen and Vera after that, and Thrain asked,
"I assume this shouting is nothing more than productive ideas on how to cross this river?"
Vera threw her hands in the air and said,
"Oh, it sure is, great commander. Nothing but production in this group. Yes sir, keep moving forward, ignore all peril, and maybe one of us will make it to the top."
She then turned and walked away briskly.
"Look out, boyo!"
Kurt shouted alarmingly as he shoved Rugal to the ground. Everyone then turned to see a massive grey tentacle wrap around Kurth and pull him into the river below.
"Kurth!"
They shouted, rushing to the edge of the river, but not diving in. They waited anxiously when several more grey tentacles popped out of the water, waving violently around. Kurth was in one of them, screaming,
"Come at me, you shanty see bitch!"
They could see the red veins on his body now as Adolin fired an arrow at the tentacle holding him. It didn't do much, but it gave Kurth an opportunity to slip an arm free with his axe. He then hacked off the end of the tentacle and fell right back down in the river.
"We need to help him!"
Iris cried out.
"How?"
Rugal asked, frustrated. Moments later, Kurth was hurled high into the air as the demon below the depths emerged with its oval mouth open and its long rows of sharp dagger-like teeth. The Kraken was waiting, as Kurth began to fall, to catch him in its mouth. Iris took immediate advantage of that opportunity it presented and shot out a huge surge of lightning at the beast. It screeched in agony and submerged itself below before it could catch Kurth and eat him. He fell back down in the river and Lessa dived in after him. Adolin reached out to stop her, shouting,
"Lessa, no!"
She wasn't quick enough though. They all stayed by the edge, anxious as ever, wondering what was going on down there. A couple minutes passed and a deep purple color mixed with the river and flowed downstream. From the weird purple stuff in the river they could see a tentacle pop up from the water and float downstream with it.
"God damn it, we can't just stand here and do nothing!"
Adolin exclaimed as she fired an arrow randomly into the water and reached for another one from her quill. She went to fire more, but Garen stopped her, saying,
"You might hit one of them, wait until it—"
His sentence was cut short as his eyes widened and he looked up past her. A massive tidal wave suddenly poured out from the waterfall, coming in fast.
"Brace yourselves!"
Thrain shouted. Garen grabbed Adolin and put his back to the tidal wave, covering her best he could. Rugal did the same with Iris. The wave crashed over them hard and the water swallowed them all up. Chapter 25. Irene the Sly, Chapter 5. The next floor was just like the previous one, but with more trees in it. Soon as they got up there they broke a hard right and hugged the wall, going on until they were all out of breath. They stayed grouped together this time as Adelia said,
"All right everyone, stay low and keep quiet, very quiet."
They did as she said, but Samhil argued quietly,
"Yeah, for all the good that did us last time. The last time they caught me way off guard and led us into a trap. This time I know they're coming and can keep us under their radar." "Well, since we have to wait again, you care to elaborate on that this time?"
Caleb asked, irritated with her. Adelia sighed and said,
"The wraiths use magic to detect presence of body, much like myself. They're collectively stronger than me, but since I know it's coming, I can make ourselves invisible to that magic, for a time." "If that's true, then why weren't you doing it before?"
Yuzin asked.
"Because concentration is a bitch and I didn't know that anyone from that cult was still fucking alive. So how about everyone go back to being silent so I can concentrate, and wait until I say it's safe before doing anything."
They kept silent after that and didn't move around much at all. All they could do was go through the brown sack Irene snagged back and sorted out their weapons. Most the weapons were common daggers mixed in with a short sword or two. From what Irene could tell, none of them had a whole lot of practice with those weapons. Although thinking about it, Irene realized she wasn't one to judge them much on their handling with weapons. She wasn't some great knight with her dagger either. In fact, taking a closer look at everyone, she realized they all shared something in common, something she found she could relate to in a way. She may not have known the circumstances or if they were always how they were, but while waiting there in silent with them, Irene came to realize everyone there was an orphan. The wait became excruciatingly boring for them to be so silent and still, but eventually Adelia said,
"Well, they finally moved on. Maybe we should wait a little longer,"
Meyer said, partially fearful.
"I mean, how do we know they won't be waiting ahead with a trap for us?" "Maybe she's right,"
Nethlin said.
"I mean, look at what they did to Rowan. I don't ever want to run into them again without the element of surprise." "He's right, our little sparkling fire trick will only throw them off once, we won't make another daring escape,"
Theo said.
"We already eluded them once and they got an even later start than us when coming in here,"
Adelia said.
"Trust me, they won't waste any more time on us, they will move on ahead and find some other unknowing people to use for their sacrifices."
She then got up and started walking ahead. All of them, Irene included, followed.
"You seem to know an awful lot about these people who you claim don't exist anymore,"
Yuzin said suspiciously.
"Care to tell us why, or should we just wait until we're endangered before you bother cluing us in on anything?"
Adelia stopped suddenly and turned around to face Yuzin.
"And just what the hell are you implying?"
she asked, aggravated.
"I'm not implying anything, I just want to know what you know about the fucking monsters that murdered him. I think I deserve that much at least, I think all of us do in fact."
Adelia glared down Yuzin for a long moment of tension before saying,
"That's none of your business."
She turned back and walked on again.
"It became our business when one of us died because of you, because you, like always, didn't tell us anything. It wouldn't be the first time your secrets put us in danger."
Adelia stopped again but didn't turn around.
"Dredging up the past won't help us at all in the future." "Yeah, that's always like you when your past or your decisions come into question. You sidestep it and work us around the problem until we just drop it. But we're not kids anymore, you can't just step around this one, you owe us answers."
Adelia turned around now and stepped close to Yuzin, staring her down.
"Or else what? What if I don't give you those answers?"
Yuzin wasn't intimidated by her at all as she said,
"Or I turn around and walk away. You know me and Rowan didn't want to come here to the tower, but we didn't know we could trust you with our friends. We thought you would lead them to their doom, just like you did Jair, turns out we were right."
Adelia said nothing and just stared at Yuzin in cold silence. When this went on for well over a minute, Yuzin smirked and turned away from her. Now addressing her friends, she said, "Adelia will be the death of all of you. We may not have had a dream life back in Dorgal, but together we had something all of us always wanted, a family. This place, Adelia, none of it's worth the effort or our lives. We're all chasing a wish promised by a dark demon, you guys don't see it now, but this place, and her, will be the doom of us all. I'm leaving while I still can, I strongly urge all of you to do the same." She then turned and walked away from them all. Simhul tried to go after her, but Adelia stopped her and whispered something into her ear. After that, Simhul looked down at her feet, no longer watching her best friend walk away. As they moved ahead, they all remained quiet and didn't speak after that incident with Yuzin. All except Caleb, who was talking with Irene at the back of the group. "You know, things aren't normally like that," Caleb said, "in fact that's the worst they have ever been. I can understand it if you don't at all want anything to do with us given recent events, but the offer is out there." Irene didn't answer right away. She walked in silence for a few minutes until speaking at last, "I lost my vanishing cloak, and my best means of getting ahead in here. I will keep with you guys until we move on past those scary people in the red cloaks, but after that I'm going off on my own again, it's better that way for me and everyone else." "Alright, fair enough, who knows, maybe by that time we will have worked our charm on you and you will change your mind entirely." He smiled at her. "Who says we're allowing her to join us in the first place?" Meyer asked, resentful. "Well, she did save our asses from those wraith people when she could have moved on, so this is by far the least we can do for her," Caleb said. Meyer yawned and moved closer to Caleb, leaning her head against his shoulder as they walked. "Well, we're going to be taking a rest soon, so if she's still around when we wake, we can all put it to a vote or whatever." And sure enough, Adelia stopped everyone to call for a long rest, to eat and sleep. They ate in silence, and when Adelia finished her fruit she sighed. "Alright, I guess I do owe you guys something about me after all we've been through," she said. "I won't give you everything, just what I think you should know." They all turned their heads and listened intently to her. "I was 10 when the Red Wraiths snatched me and my elder sister up. They kept us locked away in separate rooms until they needed us. It was days before I saw my sister again. They used magic on her to keep her awake but stopped her from moving at all.
Then they put her up on this stone slab, shaped like a coffin, and while chanting some language I didn't understand they stabbed the knife into her chest. When the dagger was pulled out her blood started rising up unnaturally and was black instead of red. Next thing I knew it came right at me and set my whole body on fire, her tainted blood consumed me in the darkness. And in that darkness I saw a demon that looked almost like a man, with talons for hands, bat wings, and those yellow piercing eyes.
Adelia shivered just thinking about it all. She paused a moment to gather herself before continuing on.
The demon said nothing, just grinned at me with its sharp row of teeth and then jabbed my forehead with its talon fingers. I woke up after that to find the wraiths' dead bodies sprawled out over the floor, mixed in with a couple magisters wearing the king symbol on their robes. Several more magisters representing the king of Dorgal were also in the room, weary from the raid on the wraiths they just made. These men and women were kind and took me home where my parents grieved the death of my sister. I tried going back to a normal life after that, but in a few short weeks I soon discovered I had magic powers, just like the Dorgal Knights. Now the thing you have to understand is back then every child was tested for magic capabilities. My whole family has only ever produced one magical offspring in several generations, but still we were tested. I failed that test and so did my sister. But whatever had happened to me that day my sister was sacrificed. I had magic, and I was strong. I joined the royal army after that, honing my abilities and spent half my life researching about the Red Wraiths so I could get revenge for what they did to my sister. Funny enough, while I was out hunting down the few wraiths that remained, Dorgal went into civil war and the king fell. When I wiped out what I thought was the very last of the wraiths, I returned home to find my home was in fact destroyed and my parents were dead. The king, who I swore allegiance to, was also gone, same with all my friends. I was now nothing more than a ghost wandering around trying to find purpose. And that's when you found us.
Caleb finished her story for her. Adelia looked up and grinned.
Yeah, that's when I started finding you guys. Look, we're all here because we have something we so greatly desire from that wish that we risk all peril to climb this tower. But before now I don't think you fully realized just how dangerous this would be. I think now would be a good time to seriously consider the danger ahead and if your desire is worth the tremendous risk to your life. I know this place will only get worse the higher we climb, and it's not just the wraiths we have to worry about. None of you are particularly talented at what you do and only me and the twins have magic power. I know it was selfish of me to bring you here, but I didn't feel right just leaving you all alone back in Dorgal. The truth is I don't think I will be able to protect you guys here. It would probably be in your best interests to go back down with Yuzin before it's too late. But don't decide right now, sleep on your decision.
She then turned her focus to Irene.
And you My name's Irene,
Irene said, feeling a little embarrassed to be the center of attention now.
Irene, you really saved all of our asses back there, and though we just met, if you want I will gladly let you join us. Or, if you don't want to be here anymore, you can catch up with Yuzin and tell her I told her to allow you to join her home. She owes you as much as any of us and you earned yourself a place in our... I'm either getting the wish or I will die trying,
Irene interrupted Adelia.
I lost my vanishing cloak saving you guys, so I will accompany you until we get past those wraith, then I'm moving on ahead of you guys.
Adelia smirked and said,
fair enough. Now though would be a good time for us all to finally get some rest.
Irene tossed and turned trying to fall asleep, but given the recent events, her new companion and the loss of her vanishing cloak, it just wouldn't happen. So she got up to keep watch and try and occupy her mind when she saw Caleb sitting up, leaned against a tree keeping his own watch. She sat next to him and he asked,
couldn't sleep either, hey? It was hard enough before but now it feels impossible,
Irene said.
Yeah, this place creeps me out too. Hey I have a strange question for you. Why did you risk so much to save us in the first place? I mean it's not like know us or anything, we also barely met like the day before.
Irene shrugged and said,
I don't know, I was following you guys around for a little while after our first encounter. Wait, you were following us, why? Because I saw something in you guys, something that felt familiar to me and I wanted to know what it was.
When Irene didn't explain right away, Caleb asked,
and what was it?
She looked down, a little shy or even ashamed to answer.
All of you are orphans, just like me.
Caleb frowned and asked,
how did you know? The signs are everywhere and I've seen enough orphans to know. Besides, strange as it may sound, you remind me of a friend of mine. And this friend, why are they not with you now? He's dead,
Irene said with a tear rolling down her cheek.
He died before he could even come to this place. He was going to leave me to chase this wish. I thought he was happy with me, but I guess I wasn't enough for him.
They were silent for a time after that until Caleb thought of a different subject to talk about.
So if you got the wish, what would you wish for? I don't think I have known you long enough to say. Well, I would wish that no child in the world will go hungry again, forever. It would just be physically impossible for children to starve.
Irene looked at Caleb. He was sincere.
That sounds very generous,
she said cynically.
I have seen too many friends of mine fade away to starvation. Why didn't you just steal your food, or the coins to buy it? We tried best we could, but when you live in a town where the majority of people are magisters, it's much harder to do. I would always hear rumors of the orphan homes in the larger towns, and in the cities. But we never knew where they were, so we didn't bother risking our lives to journey to them. I would have starved myself if not for Adelia. She took me into her home with the others here, and raised me up. When I told her I wanted to be one of the few non-magical knights in all of Dorgal, she made me a wooden sword and helped me learn to use it. I would spend hours a day practicing swordplay, most times by myself. What about you? What sort of dreams or aspirations did you have for your future?
Irene hesitated to answer.
I never really thought about my future, didn't think I had much of one, to be honest. But can I ask you, what are you guys planning to do if all of you make it to the top of the tower before anyone else? What do you mean? Well, only one wish is granted, so how are you going to decide who gets it? Our plan is to word the wish into one big one so we all can get what we want. And if that doesn't work, I guess we would vote on it then. You know, you could journey up the tower with us, you don't need to rush ahead.
Irene didn't answer, so Caleb turned to her and saw she had fallen asleep. He smiled, thinking she looked even cuter while sleeping.